Good afternoon, folks. Eastern time. Good morning, folks. West Coast time. Good evening. Good night. India time, 10:30 p.m. Folks, welcome to the Saturday noon hour Leader Speak, brought to you by the U.S. India Political Action Committee and the Imagine India Institute. My name is Robinder Sachdev. I'm the president of Imagine India Institute. It's a pleasure to host a wonderful, distinguished panel today on a discussion which is very, very relevant to US India relations. In fact, it's very relevant to US domestic economy itself also, as of course also relevant to India's national security and US India relations. The topic of today that we will be discussing with our panel is about the future of US India relations. Please, as you are watching, whosoever, this is being broadcast live on the US India Political Action Committee Facebook page. It is also being broadcast live right now on the Imagine India Facebook page. So folks who are seeing this broadcast right now, please pop by, come by, check by, wave by, give in your questions or comments, and our panel would absolutely be delighted to see if they can answer or weave in your question into their comments, which they will be sharing. We look forward to a wonderful conversation over the next 1 hour. And it is now my pleasure to welcome our distinguished panel colleagues. I'll start with, or whichever, we'll just introduce you to each one of them. Let me first get them into the studio, and then we introduce them. So thank you everyone for joining this panel on the future of US-India foreign defense relations. We have on the panel with us Abhijit Singh, who is the Senior Fellow and Head of Maritime Policy Initiative at the Observer Research Foundation, former Navy officer in India. We have on this panel also Kriti Upadhyay, a research associate with the Vadvani Chair in US-India Policy Studies at the CSIS. We have John Ferrari, who is the Chief Administrative Officer of Complex, a visiting fellow at AEI and a former Major General. We have Crystal Vedakal, a South Asia defense policy expert, also the CEO of Crystal Clear Communications and a former director at the Department of Defense. And we have with us Commandant Hemant Kumar Rai, retired Indian Coast Guard, who is the Group CEO of Dempo Defense. Thank you everyone, folks, for joining in. A pleasure to have you on this panel with us. Now, the first round, and for the benefit of our audiences who are tuning in right now, we will be doing the format of the discussion would be rounds, 1 round, 2 round kind of a thing. So the first round, each panelist is invited to make their opening comments in about 3 odd minutes in the overarching topic of the day today. So with our first speaker, let's say, may I invite Commandant Rai to give his view on US-India defense relations from the point of view of what he sees where we are now as the year 2020 draws to a close, and as, of course, a new US administration is scheduled to take office pretty soon. So, Commandant Rai, floor is yours, sir.
Thanks, Robinder. Good evening, good morning, and good afternoon. I will just try to correlate 3 interrelated points from the main topic in the background, because I think without them joining together, this discussion cannot be much more meaningful. Now, number 1 point is with the defense. Also, let's talk about oil and gas. Just little brief I will give it. Why I'm giving it brief? I would just like to tell you. India defense and oil and gas have a common alike similarity, wherein in both the cases, both the industries rather, we have almost 80% import dependency. That is number 1. Number 2, specific to oil and gas, the 20% which we produce in India for their equipment and system, there is again around 80% of import dependency, including engineering and design. Third, almost 11th month and so, US has put sanction on Nord Stream 2. That's a Baltic gas line pipe coming from Russia to Germany. That's a 1,200 kilometers pipeline, and Russia is targeting to supply around 50 million barrel cubic meter of gas to Europe through Germany, right? And around 136 kilometers is still remaining. Post the sanction was put by the US in December 2019, almost 11 months back, right? Now, see, Russia is trying to give the gas to Europe through Germany, isolating Ukraine and then Poland. So the third is this having the geopolitical change in scenario, because Russia is determined to supply gas to the Europe, wherein US itself has become basically crude oil dependent more, and in fact they are producing more than the Saudi Arabia. So they also like to have their gas flowing to Europe, and even this Biden government has imposed a sanction recently. So therefore, there is a shift in geopolitical scenario over here. So oil and gas and defense industry together, especially to India perspective and US perspective, is merged together. It will be beneficial to both the countries, right? Now, we have our acquisition procedure in place now, recently released on October 1st, 2020, right? And there is a lot of procedural requirement, isn't it? And if you try to correlate now with if the intent is very clear between the US and India, and especially US being the oldest democracy, and India is the biggest democracy in the world, and our intent is almost alike. We are at the highest level of geopolitical relationship with the US. Now, how this relationship and oil and gas like similarity with the defense, especially India, because you are tackling basically with the defense with the same umbrella. If the Indian scenario for the oil and gas, specific to the equipment and engineering, is handled together and aligned together with our defense acquisition procedure and US rules and regulation, coming out the bridging document, basically how it can be implemented at the ground level, that will have a real change in scenario, and you can see the ball is rolling on the ground, isn't it? Other than it will be again a discussion at macro level and no results coming on the ground.
Sure. Thank you so much, Hemant. Very interesting take from you. One in the linking up with oil and gas and security along with it, and the other part of that, the defense procurement acquisition policies in India and what's happening on the ground. Thank you so much. Meanwhile, as you were speaking, we do have some comments from people who are watching. Thank you, folks. This is Tim Soen. Hi, Robinder, tuning in from the US. Thank you so much, Tim. A pleasure to hear from you, sir. Please do put in any question you would have, and I'm sure our panel will be delighted to kind of help answer your question. Also, Tim is paging Brian. Yeah, sure. Get more people to view in. Tim, that'd be a pleasure. Thank you. Thank you so much. We have Suresh Gupta. Wow, a great speakers learning this morning. Thank you, Dr. Gupta. Pleasure for us to hear from you. Please put in your questions, and thank you for the huge thumbs up to our panel. We're absolutely always proud of our panel. So thank you so much. We have Ashwani Kumar saying hello from Chicago. Thank you, sir. Thank you so much for the hello. But would be more interesting if you give in some questions or comments which you would like to hear. Thank you so much. Now, may I move to our next speaker, which is Crystal Vedakal, South Asia Defense Policy Expert, CEO at Crystal Clear Communications and former Director GS15 level at Department of Defense. Crystal, your take on the topic of the day. How do you look at it, and what would you like to share with us? Thank you.
Well, thank you so much again for having me on, and I want to also thank Vic Chauhan and Sanjay Puri from US Impact. Before I start, I'll just briefly mention I've worked at several think tanks on South Asia defense policy, including RAND Corporation, the National Security Division, on civil military operations in Afghanistan, Carnegie Endowment for International Peace, Woodrow Wilson International Center, and the Center for Strategic and International Studies, South Asia Department. So I come with experience, both within the U.S. Department of Defense, working in academia, because I also worked on a PhD on the Kashmir conflict. And as I mentioned, the think tank experience. So I'd like to focus on the recent visit from former Secretary of Defense Mark Esper and Secretary of State Mike Pompeo back in October of this year with the 2+2 ministerial visit. So there, they spoke about current U.S.-India defense trade, right? And you have the signing of the Basic Exchange and Cooperation Agreement for Geospatial Cooperation, bringing both countries closer together and to help counter China was really the purpose. So there's talk that Lockheed Martin gave a classified briefing on its capabilities to develop F-35s developed by the U.S. Joint Striker program back in 2018. However, each F-35 costs about $100 million each. So India would have to obviously increase its current defense budget, which stands at around $73 billion. The current U.S.-India defense trade is at about $20 billion today. We have seen a shift. India's been a longstanding customer of Soviet Russian arms, but recently India has been buying American, including Apache Chinook helicopters, howitzers, and discussions are underway for acquiring drones as well. So I think this is a good shift in a direction where there's at least talks and there's movement of future enhancement of U.S.-India defense trade. President-elect Biden is extremely hopeful that we will start to increase this trade and get it to be at 100%. And I think also if we go back in time, the signing of the U.S.-India nuclear deal back in 2005, that ended a nearly 3-decade moratorium on nuclear trade and frosty relations between both countries. And I think the U.S. now realizes that India is a natural ally, and it has been realizing that, I'd say, over the past decade. And so we are seeing, I think, a positive and brighter future for increased defense trade between these two nations.
Thank you so much, Crystal. Absolutely, yes. I think I will get into more the meat and potatoes as we go deeper, but absolutely a very wonderfully set the context for the discussion as we roll on. Meanwhile, we have a comment from another viewer, Prasoon Srivastav, saying that great learning. Thank you, Prasoon. Thank you so much. Please come up with questions so that the learning can be enhanced, the sharing can be enhanced. The idea is more sharing and more connecting of dots or sparking of dots amongst the viewers and even amongst us as panelists also. As we go through, our viewers and audiences would relate to the fact that we are also exchanging and learning from each other. That's one of the beautiful things of such a fantastic panel. Thank you, Prasoon. And folks, please, whosoever is watching, keep popping by, giving your comments and asking questions. Now, may I invite John Ferrari, Chief Administrative Officer of Complex, a visiting fellow at the AEI and a former Major General. Sir, given the context of the topic today, what is your big take and where do you see this relationship or this relationship going? Yours, please.
Thank you for having this and for inviting me. And good morning, good evening, good afternoon around the world for everybody who's listening. The relationship between the United States and India is deep and long term, right? Somebody pointed out already that the United States is the world's oldest democracy and India is the world's largest. And so we share with us the democratic principles that bind us together. We also share a common language, which is helpful. Economically, the countries are becoming more and more intertwined, and with high technology, biotechnology, there's over 200,000 Indians in graduate schools across the United States, and I think we're now up to $150 billion of trade. And so when you have the political integration surrounding democracy and you have the economic integrations coming together, defense naturally follows. And it's tying together that last pillar of the strategic relationship that has been deepening and needs to deepen. The United States a couple of years ago changed our combatant command in the Pacific from PACOM to Indo-PACOM to highlight the deepening relationship between India and the United States. Aircraft carriers from the U.S. have been visiting India, and Teddy Roosevelt is leaving to join an Indian aircraft carrier on exercises. And so I think going forward, right, it's going to be a lot of military to military engagement at all levels, from Army units working together, naval units, Air Force units, so that the United States forces, the Indian forces, and all of the allies in the region can come together as one. For the next administration coming in, I think you'll also see it's really been a continuity now across 3 successive administrations: the Obama administration, the Trump administration, and now the Biden administration, which is really the U.S. focusing its military in the Pacific region. And if you're going to focus on the Pacific region, anchoring in with India is a key part of that defense relationship and bringing all the allies together. And so I think that the training and integration of the military is going forward is going to be a key part of that relationship. Thank you.
Thank you so much, sir. Again, the context, I think there are too many positives to the context and too many synergies, perhaps. And you mentioned, even stuff like biotechnology and these, advanced other technologies being nano, AI, machine learning, all that kind of, because now military and defense is becoming something new. In fact, even the pandemic is a matter of national security or defense now, if we were to look at it. Thank you so much. We have some more comments from some viewers. One is a comment from Adarsh Srivastava. He's saying, Robin, seems sound. Focus needed on agenda as I feel. Thanks. Yeah, absolutely, sir. We will get into the focus context because right now is the opening questions. There are too many, there's several differences of opinions also between US and India and some challenges which do need to be overcome. And we hope that these discussions kind of help towards bringing some common ground on those questions and challenges. Another question or a comment from a viewer is Jalaj Kakkar. Miss Call, defense trade is going up between India and US. However, Pakistan still going strong with terrorism, India, Afghanistan. How is the new president going to change all these and world activities? Thank you so much, Jalaj, for asking these questions. I'm sure as we get into the next round, some of these questions would very much be answered. Right now, we are in the first, the opening comments as each of our distinguished panelists, shares their views. And I'll bring up these questions a bit later also when we are, talking some specific areas, perhaps. Now may I invite Kriti Upadhyay, Research Associate, Wadhwani Chair in US-India Policy Studies at the CSIS. Kriti, the floor is yours, please.
Thank you so much, Robin. It's such an honor to be on here with a panel of such esteemed guests. My outlook, for the next administration is that, at least in the sense of our defense and strategic relationship, there is going to be a sense of continuity. But of course, that continuity is also going to be with some caveats. And I'll give you 3 examples to tell you exactly what I mean. So, for example, with respect to China, I don't see the US-China competition going anywhere. But the way that the Biden administration handles China, the amount of confrontation or conciliation over there would also, set the stage for India's own maneuvering space in dealing with China. So the confrontation, US-China confrontation doesn't go, but I think the way that Biden administration will deal with China will also set the stage for India. Secondly, in Indo-Pacific, again, I don't see the centrality of Indo-Pacific and the preeminent role of India within the Indo-Pacific going anywhere. But I am cautious and realistic in thinking that and knowing that, once the Biden administration comes on, there'll be so many other priorities up there that would perhaps take up time, and the investment of within Indo-Pacific may not be the same. So, you have things like mending ties with traditional allies like NATO, EU. So I think those things can take a little bit of high priority on the agenda, but the centrality of the Indo-Pacific will remain. Thirdly, I know somebody mentioned Pakistan. We do anticipate US and Pakistan coming close together. But again, I don't see that happening at the cost of US relationship with India. And the space that has been created to, jointly deals with issues such as counterterrorism or radical Islam, I think that space will still remain on the table. I also see an opportunity for India, with especially with this administration, and there is a chance that they will work on something similar to JCPOA. And, something like that could, again, give India space to retain its relationship with Iran. As we know, India has suffered a little bit on the threat of secondary sanctions in dealing with Iran. And finally, an imminent threat that, interestingly, this administration has inherited from the previous administration, which is the CAATSA sanctions. As we know that S-400 and, the Sukhoi upgrades, these are some things that are now inching closer and closer. And as these deliveries inch closer, the threat of, our relationship being strained as a result of the CAATSA sanction also looms closer. So I think that is one thread that I'll be looking forward to. But overall, I see continuity, albeit with some caveats.
Sure. Thank you so much, Kriti. Absolutely, yes. I mean, the questions are the Quad. I mean, how much of a punch is there in the Quad, and the issue of sanctions and the secondary sanctions, or the secondary, the ripple effect of these sanctions on India, and consequently the effect on even the defense business per se. Absolutely, we'll get into that. Now, may I invite Abhijit Singh and the senior fellow and head of maritime policy initiative at the Observer Research Foundation, and himself also former Indian Navy officer. So as we said, this panel is book ended by maritime experts. We started with Hemant Rai, a naval officer, and the last person in this round is again Abhijit Singh. In fact, going into the next round and subsequent rounds, we will be delving much more deeper into the Quad and maritime security. We'll take advantage of your expertise so that you can share with us and our viewers. And viewers, please keep on bringing your comments and questions. We would love to have your questions and comments so that our panel could at least set the tone, or could gather what the audiences are feeling, and could adapt and adopt their responses to better answer the questions which are there. That being said, Abhijit ji, may I invite you for your thoughts in an overall context as the opening comment for this discussion. Yours, please.
Yes, thank you, Robinder, for inviting me to this excellent panel. It's not an opportunity that I get very often to speak to such excellent guests. So what I'd like to say is that, in New Delhi, there's tremendous enthusiasm and interest in the developing India-US defense relationship and the maritime relationship. And there is a sense in a certain section of the strategic community that our relations are not only on a positive trajectory, but they are past an inflection point wherein, as we go into the future, things are only going to get better from here. And this, I think, has primarily to do with the developments of the past few years. So somebody mentioned the foundational agreements, and it is true that after the LIMOA was signed in 2016, and more recently the COMCASA and the BECA, these two agreements have generated tremendous hope in the Indian military that somehow dealing with America, getting American technology will improve the effectiveness of the Indian military. And in a conversation that I was having just a few days back with some top military officers, some of them pointed out that what we really ideally would like to do is to leverage BECA and COMCASA, that are technical agreements, to get better quality secure equipment from the US, and also somehow improve our kill chains. So that would mean that our ability to use precision strike capability, to be able to use autonomous platforms and such issues, technical issues. So what this would do is that it would improve our domain awareness. It would just improve our effectiveness in battle. So there is again tremendous hope that has been invested in these foundational agreements that we have signed. But beyond that, I think this discussion is also strategic and political, in the sense that the manner in which the Quad has been revived, and now it has been taken to it's been elevated to the foreign ministers level. Also the fact that we've brought in the Malabar exercises. We've now included both Japan and Australia as a part of these exercises. The fact that we are doing anti-submarine warfare exercises with Japan and with the US on a regular basis. The PAIs have been operating together. And also the fact that, we've got these agreements like the ISA, the Industrial Security Annex, this agreement called the HOSTAG, where we are doing, cross landings, helicopter landings on each other's warships, SCA-1 authorization. All of that points to the fact that both countries are making concessions to each other. They're building opportunities for each other. What I'd like to point out is just two things. One is that one of the areas that has not gotten enough, so to say, traction in the Indian strategic establishment, even though it has got some traction in the media, is just the importance of defense trade. The fact is that just over the past few years, we've managed to get equipment not just worth $10 billion, but also this is some of the best equipment that is used by the US military. So whether you talk of the P8, so our version called the P8Is, the C-17s, or the Apache, the Chinhooks, this is just top end equipment, and all of this equipment has been actually very reliable. It has been giving excellent service to the Indian military. And so the Indian military does recognize that, as opposed to, say, Russian equipment that we've been having a lot of problems with. For instance, with the aircraft carrier, the MiG-29 accident that happened just a couple of days back. American equipment is more reliable. So I see, again, great opportunity there. Where I think this is just one sort of my last point, where I think we need to be a little more sort of mindful and thoughtful about the challenges that might be there in the relationship as we move forward, is the fact that what we do on the defense side or on the maritime side actually flows from what the geopolitics of the Indo-Pacific region is going to be like, and how much of the Biden administration's stress is going to be on the Indo-Pacific and China. The fact of the matter is that after the Galwan incident, the Ladakh incident a few months ago, India is completely focused on Chinese presence in the Indian Ocean region. And the fact that that President-elect Biden actually has sort of shied away from using the term Indo-Pacific and does not want to call out the China challenge frontally has been noticed in Delhi. And this has brought back some nagging apprehensions that perhaps the Biden administration, even though I would agree with Kriti and others that there might generally be continuity in policy, it might not be as forward-leaning on the China challenge as India would ideally like the US to be. And that might actually be a fly in the ointment, if I might put it, and that might actually, create a little bit of negative vibes in the relationship. I hope that doesn't happen, but I thought I'd just put that out because that's something that we are completely focused on for the moment. But I'll stop here. Thanks.
Thank you so much, sir. Absolutely. I mean, it goes without saying, and we all understand that, there are definitely, I mean, there's a lot of goodwill, there's a lot of traction, there are a lot of, agreements in place now, a lot of interlinkages happening, but at the same time, there are questions and there are challenges, and there's some clouds also, They may not be storms, but they're clouds, and the weather is unpredictable, in a sense, as weather is always. So there is that some uncertainty also. Thank you so much, sir. And now the second round we'll start. In this round, I'll be asking each of you. See, each of you is working in some area of your own passion and expertise. Either you're doing some research or you have some idea or a model or a business, because some of you are in the corporate environment also. So I will be inviting each of you to share a specific area in which you are working and why you think that important or of interest to you or value to you. Because again, I think it becomes more interesting for the viewers and for us also if we get our own case studies and anecdotes. So in this round, I'll be inviting you to share your personal area expertise, where you're working and going deeper, and what business models you're envisaging or what research you are looking at. Before we start the second round, there are some more comments and all. I would request our viewers to please bring in your questions so that we can, have our panel listen to your questions and maybe answer some of those. We had a comment coming in from Shalini Trivedi. A pleasure hearing, very informative. Thank you so much, Shalini ji. A pleasure for us to have you listen. Please do come up with your questions and spread this word. Share this link on your Facebook page so that your friends can also see this live happening right now. Next is a comment from Vikram Singh Chauhan. Vikram is a co-founder of the US-India Political Action Committee. Vikram, thank you so much for coming by, and you should be here, of course, moderating and participating in the panel. But so Vikram says, I had met with Defense Minister Rajnath Singh on his last visit to the US. What is the future of US-India defense trade in the light of recent visit of Secretary of State and former Sachdev expert trip to India in October of this year? Thank you, Vikram, so much. I think Crystal, in her opening comments, referred to some of this. So we shall be, kind of going down this track, the future of US-India trade. Now, coming to the second round, may I invite Hemant Rai. Sir, would you have any open sky, blue sky thinking in some area in which you are working, which you think could be of value to US-India defense relations?
India capital outlay by 2025 is around $225 billion. That is a fact number one. India is targeting 5 trillion economy by then. That is second fact. Now, how it could be achieved? The third fact is the US-India relation is at the peak. The intent is very, very clear. But how we are going to synergize the target of India and the US together, that's the crux. Now, there's a procedural delay from both the side. Unless until you follow the procedure, on the ground, it's not going to materialize. So you have to think beyond G to G. You have to think how the industries, they should start interacting, both the countries. That level thought pressure has to penetrate in US and India both by a think tanks. From the microscopic level of the thought process, where intent is very clear, relationship is fantastic. We are the maturity, democracy, both the places, oldest and the largest. Culturally, we are the same. Indians working in the US. How their company, they start trusting the Indian, especially MSMEs. MSMEs are they're going to drive basically. We talk about the Make in India concept, self-reliant concept, or Atmanirbhar Bharat, we call it in Hindi. That's a crest. So these are the issue from the India side. Now, how the rules can be penetrated, broken into the microscopic level in the project management, to call it WBS, where work breakdown is structured. I am not able to see any discussion from WPS level 3 and level 4. Unless until you have to break down this thought process up to level 4 and level 5, and let it be level 3 to start with, it will be discussion only. So you have to have the bridge document of these policies between the US and India. Even you can club is geopolitical scenario, how the things changing in the Middle East. Because India is having a good relation with Israel. US have put sanctions to Russia. You take S-400 missile from the Russia, isn't it? So the oil and gas and all together, the think tank at the working level must put the brain together and break this structure at the very lowest level, at a macroscopic level, where we should start thinking beyond G to G, where industries, Indian industry and US technology, master technology industry, they start interacting. That will be the real scenario. You think the things started moving. That will the real become the gain basically for the both economy, both the country economy, how the things will move. In fact, should get technology from the US. You have the manpower here. The system is ready. I'll just try to quote, in this pandemic, in the UP government, you have a defense corridor in UP. It's coming up, and also in Tamil Nadu. So the government is very, very serious and very, very sincere. The Samsung, stadium only, UP government has approved to opening an extra mobile industry station in India, where they're shifting base from the China. So this is the level of decision making taking place in India, which otherwise from outsider used to be basically a long-term processes. Why it is happening? Because when you bring out the clarity, when you come down to the microscopic level of the thought processes, all the time I'm trying to integrate oil and gas and defense industries together, because both the industry have the very high-end technological equipment, used in ship, used in army, used for the air force. Similarly, for oil and gas industry, upstream, midstream, you need the technology. India can have become the hub for the supply chain from the US too. You can supply from here to Middle East, Far East, and also to Southeast Asia. So my take on this is basically in these things, let's put the brain together to come out to the macroscopic level. We start quantify. See, unless until you quantify, you start making the empirical equations, meeting aligning with the DAP, we call it Defense Acquisition Procedure, released 2020. Because see here, the deviation nobody can take. For taking one deviation, one something, you have to go to MOD for taking the approval. It's a very long time taking processes. So you have to come out the bridge document sort of something between the US and India, isn't it? And that document should become basically guidelines. That document should direct how the industries should interact together.
Great.
And when this thing is happening, I'm telling you, the India and US together, they will flourish. And it will change the scenario. It was not happening in the past. And therefore, all the experts, there's a time for the integration of the experts in the field industries. What Robin has been talking about, like shipping industry, defense industries, oil and gas is ready from the both sides. It's a time to come to the execution level. When the intent is very clear, even the Biden government, there is not going to be a paradigm shift in their, thought process and then scenario. It's time to execute now. And execution is only possible when you start quantify the items. Quantify the defense, oil and gas together.
Thank you. And thank you very much. Yeah, great. I mean, a forceful, not an argument, I would say a forceful, case you put out. Absolutely, it's the nuts and bolts. The point that, okay, move beyond G2G, but defense being the sector it is, I mean, the governments do get involved, but yes, absolutely. It's the industries and MSMEs. And as you say that, getting down into the nuts and bolts of collaboration and technology transfer, and of course, integrated perspectives to look at. And maybe that's a thought for the think tank folks out here on the panel. What he is suggesting, I do think, is this huge merit in the fact that, how can we look at, next steps which are leading to execution. So thank you so much, sir. Now may I invite Crystal. Crystal, what is some area in which you're working right now, or you're passionate, or you think somebody should really be done, like Hemant said, this is something which he feels about? Because, these are case studies. I think we got to move on, and it'll be more interesting for the viewers and for each one of us to learn also about what your thoughts or each of the panel's thoughts are. And I think they really help shape the discourse forward. So what is it that maybe you're working on? Where do you see some, sunrise sector or sunrise space that you would like to focus? Or maybe you're already yours, please.
Sure. So I just want to clarify by saying that, I'm speaking as a private citizen. Yeah. So none of my views are the views of the U.S. Department of Defense. And I'll speak in terms of my personal views. So going into what Hemant said and what leading into a bit of Vic's question, I think we should go back in time a little bit and then see where we are today. I mean, until about 2008, the U.S. had sold military equipment worth maybe 200 million, right? And that skyrocketed to about 20 billion today, with about 15 billion in the pipeline. So we've definitely seen great progression in the past 12 years, right? And I think that under the Trump administration, with the recent visit, we're seeing the 2017 prediction of India being the most favored defense partner really coming into the spotlight today. So I think that a lot of what's going to need to happen is the involvement of some of our major U.S. defense manufacturers. So I mentioned Lockheed Martin, but also Boeing, right? I mean, you have Dennis Swanson, Vice President of Global Marketing at Boeing. He talked about space and security. The bilateral defense cooperation has really evolved considerably over the past several years. And you have a growing convergence of American and Indian defense interests, right? And so India's notoriously produced a lot of indigenous, right, weapons, but they're now looking to really expand their purchasing of weapons from the U.S. So I think we see the shifting balance of power. I mean, especially in regards to to China, that Beijing committed 126 billion in Central and South Asia between 2000 and 2017, right? I mean, a lot of this has put fears in the U.S. So that shift of power with the U.S. was more naturally tilted towards Pakistan, is shifting towards India. And I think we're going to start to see more involvement from the major U.S. defense manufacturers and the trade coming together between U.S. and India. And I really think that this is more going to fall under political considerations rather than military, where the India will have to move away from being a longstanding customer of Russia, right? And really have a shift in looking towards the future in terms of purchases that they make, investments, a lot of this bilateral trade. And we see positive growth coming out from the Quad, right? US, Australia, Japan, India, from there in terms of where our future is to go. So I'll leave it at that.
Thank you so much, Crystal. Thank you so much. And absolutely, I appreciate, and the nature of the questions such that we are wanting to hear from you as your personal view, personal opinion, nothing to do with any affiliation, if I may say so. Given the world where we are, I mean, that's the perspective we come with. Uh, Thank you so much, Crystal. Now, may I come to John, sir? The same question, whichever way you may want to take it. My question is, what is it something on which you're working right now? Maybe in something in cybersecurity, or maybe in some of these other technologies, or some policy area where you see some interesting scope to innovate, because it's about some, in some ways, innovation, and innovations that our minds can bring to the table. Of course, we do understand lots of, there are lots of challenges, no doubt without that. And of course, there's a lot of sunny scenario, of course, but between the two, there is the proverbial slip between the cup and the lip, right? So that being said, we would invite you to share your perspective on where you think you personally are, hopeful, and looking at some innovation on US India defense relations.
Yes, so at AEI, we are spending a lot of time right now looking at the pressures of reduced budgets on the U.S. military and how the U.S. military does modernize for the China fight. The U.S. military, after a decade of fighting, or 2 decades of fighting the counterinsurgency fight, needs to modernize going forward. And so one of the things we're working on is there's different ways for militaries to modernize. One is to stop buying what are called legacy items, the things that you already own, and develop new weapons systems with the new technologies in them. In this case, a lot of information technology, artificial intelligence, the kill chain sensor to shooter link. One of the things that we're a proponent on is arguably something you just brought up, which is called innovation over invention. A lot of times in defense, people want to invent new technologies. What we're saying is, the commercial sector has already done a lot of innovation in artificial intelligence and cloud computing and communications. If the countries together, in this case, India, the United States, and those in the surrounding regions, can work together to innovate, to use the common standards and the information technology and infrastructure that already exists. We don't have to spend a lot of money building our own systems, inventing new technologies, right? What we've got to do is innovate. How do we put the technologies that currently exist, from smartphones to computers to microchips, together so that our weapon systems work with each other? Because what we want to be able to do as an alliance is to be able to portray strength as a fist rather than as individual fingers. And so going forward for the US and India, there's a lot of talk about we have to buy a lot of the common weapon systems and focusing on the big systems as a way to achieve interoperability. Perhaps there's a different, less costly way, which takes a lot of the information technology that currently exists and essentially bolts it into the systems as we have it and innovates how we fight and how we command and control and how we link US sensors to Indian shooters to perhaps other countries in the region's command and control systems. And it's that alliance and that structure that I think will enable us to afford what we need to do, because budget pressures for all the governments going forward with the COVID crisis pandemic and its economic dislocation, all militaries are going to be under pressure to reduce spending. And so there is a way to do this in the next couple of years without hoping for modernization a decade from now.
Thank you so much. I think that's a beautiful point. Much should be, I would think, looked into it, what you're saying. And especially the point of, the budget constraints, and, budget constraints are there. Even India has, I mean, we may be buying, but if you look, oftentimes our purchases are being delayed, or we have, ambitions, but India is not able to achieve because, again, budget constraints. So if there can be, ways and means of collaborating on innovations, and which are less which carry less burden on the budgets, but at the same time can deliver more force multipliers. And given the world of today, AI and IoT and all of that. I think there's a lot to be said in what you're saying, sir. Thank you so much. May I not invite, and folks, whoever is or who is listening by, please put in your comments and questions. We are Facebook Live right now on the US India Political Action Committee Facebook page. We are live also on the Imagine India Institute Facebook page. Please put in your questions and comments. We've got a wonderful set of panelists here with us and happy to discuss. We are reflective thinking out here in this panel, and the conversation is going brilliant. Thank you, please. May I now invite Kriti? Again, my question is similar. What is it that you're doing something, one area in which you're passionate or where you see scope, which you see nobody else is doing, why not? Those are the kind of things maybe we need to put out. So what are your thoughts on something like that, please?
Well, Robin, one of the worst things you can do is ask a policy wonk what they're working on, because they
Sure.
tend to go on and on. So I'll try to keep this very brief, despite myself. But one of the major things that I'm looking at and specialize in is India federal economic reforms. And for our folks listening in, you can go on indiareforms.csis.org, and then there's this reform scorecard of 30 high level reforms, that can lead to economic growth and job creation in India. And those reforms are tracked by us, on a weekly, daily basis. And as those reforms get completed during the term of an Indian government, we mark them off. So the understanding here is that, India's economic growth is not only India's own economic growth, but has lessons in value for the world. So just an example, a resilient India, an economically powerful India leads to, more resilient supply chains for everybody, right? We already spoke about budgetary allocations. Ultimately, India's the amount of heavy lifting India can do within the Indo-Pacific and in defense is constrained by its budget allocations, which cannot really, its defense budget really can't go up unless, the economy is growing. And we've dealt with such issues. There's another project that's really close to my heart, which is on higher education. And that's a project generously funded by the State Department, where we're looking at, how higher education partnerships can actually lead to economic growth and collaboration between both US and India. Like we spoke about, innovation. Innovation is one thing that can directly happen with higher education partnerships. So, defense technology, sharing defense technology, doing joint development in various areas. Those are some things that we're trying to do and assess how to go forward and have greater impact in these areas through our Partnership 2020 project. Again, you can look this up, and we also send a quarterly newsletter which you can sign up to. One last project, I promise you this is the last one I mentioned, is within defense. And the way that we look at defense is really different from other think tanks, because we're not just looking at India, Pakistan, India, Afghanistan, and so on and so forth, but we're actually looking at India's defense strategy vis-a-vis the rise of China within that area. So one of our latest reports actually looks at uses satellite imagery to look at how India is at the forefront of Chinese ambitions. It's a wonderful report, and feel free to look it up if you have the time. It's called A Frozen Line in the Himalayas. So those are a few things that we're working on. Our institution as a whole also distinguishes itself in being perhaps the only one who look at state level economic reforms and business reforms with the amount of granularity that we do. So that's something else that your viewers can check out at CSIS Wadhwani Chair. And we also work very closely on issues of apprenticeship, skills, MSME, again, business policy issues within India.
Sure. Thank you very much. Oh, absolutely. I mean, that goes without saying, national security or defense is an outcome of, various aspects of capacity building, ranging from, even the human resource, the skills, and the economic, growth or the economic capabilities. So thank you so much for sharing. We do have, before I invite Abhijit ji for his comments or views, we have a comment from Vikram again. Vikram says, following up with innovation, the US DoD and NATO has acquisition of new capabilities which bypass federal regulations using something known as other transaction agreement. They are looking for commercial ideas, even partnership with allies in India. How is the Indian side getting innovative ideas in defense? Thank you so much, Vikram. In fact, now, since I'll be inviting Abhijit, maybe he can also factor in some part of this question. which you have put in, Vikram, that how is India looking to innovate in our acquisitions. That being said, Abhijit ji, I invite you again, open ended. What are you passionate about? What are you working on? Maybe if you can share, of course. And where do you think if something were to be done more? Because you see, as a platform, the US India Political Action Committee, we do have sometimes some at least access to some policy makers, so we can push ideas. That's what we basically try and do. So over to you, sir.
Thank you. So, there are a couple of areas that I'm working on, and a couple of areas that, to use your term, I'm passionate about. But I guess what I'm going to do is I'm going to stick to limit myself to just two areas, and that's primarily because two of our guests have pointed those areas out. One is this area of India-US defense trade that Hemant pointed out. When it comes to defense trade with America, India actually faces a dilemma, which is that a lot of our big ticket purchases are made via the FMS route, which is the government route, as Hemant was bringing out. But the challenge there is that whereas the government does the US government does try and fast track those proposals, and we sort of get them, they're able to expedite those the purchases. But the fact is that defense technology transfer doesn't happen in a way that India would ideally desire or appreciate. The other thing is that what India really would ideally want to do is to go via the commercial route. Again, something that Hemant pointed out. Now with DCS, which is the direct commercial sales, the issue is that you're dealing with the company, and so you can actually have an agreement with the company about what kind of technology would they transfer. And here I have to say that whilst our relationship is great and we are getting a lot of equipment from the US, but there is an inherent resistance or a hesitancy among the US defense companies to part with proprietary technology for good reason. Proprietary technology is not something that you can give away for a dime. But the thinking on the Indian side is that if we are going to be spending these top dollars to buy this fairly expensive equipment, we should be able to leverage this for some technology, because it's not possible for the Indian side to keep going back to the US to keep buying new equipment every time some equipment or some platform becomes obsolete. So with commercial sales, the trouble is that the equipment, the platforms are very expensive, and it takes a long time for the proposals to be processed. So we've got to look for a via media, some way in which we can keep the government in the loop and engage with the defense companies. But we've absolutely got to make sure that there is substantive transfer of technology, because Make in India, etc., is really not going to work unless we don't manage to get know-how and technology from the US. And that, to be very honest, at this moment is not happening again in a way that we initially envisaged. Second, I think that, again, on the issue that Don brought out, which was about interoperability, it's an excellent point. The Indian Navy has been trying to up its interoperability with the US Navy. The trouble is that, you see, what happens is that on the US side, there is a thinking that the only way we can operate with the Indian military is if we absolutely integrate the two militaries, not just the navies, but even the armies and the air force. We should have an integrated format of operations. As Ashley Tellis a couple of days back in an interaction was saying that what we've got to do is have all the communications and routines down pat. We've got to simply, put the building blocks of that interoperability in order, so that tomorrow, if there is, a crisis, when push comes to shove, the US military is there to quickly help the Indian military, because we've practiced all of those procedures. But what's happened is that on the Indian side, there's very little appetite for that kind of collaboration. And there are reasons for that. On the naval side, there is less of a hesitancy, less of a reluctance, but on the Army and the Air Force, there certainly is. And as senior, Air Force and Army officers have pointed out, that you see, we use a lot of Russian equipment. And the fear is that if we are going to do too much with the US, they are going to gain access to our systems, to Russian systems, and that in some ways might compromise the efficacy of Indian military and also the working of those Russian systems. Russia will not be too happy. In the next about 10 years or so, we will continue to remain dependent on Russia for those systems. So we've got to draw a line somewhere about how much we can do with the US military. Lastly, and most importantly, what's happened in the relationship is that, when it comes to deterring China, China, we know it's the main threat. the major thrust has been on denial operations, not so much on deterrence operations. For instance, we need underwater technology from the US. We need submarine technology, sonar, sonobuoys, seabed sensors. All of that we are not getting. What we are getting is aerial surveillance technology. What we are getting is, big ticket platforms that can help us deny the Chinese the use of the streets. But what we need to actually do is focus on surveillance and deterrence operations. And I think that is going to be the key area of cooperation between India and the US going forward, because the Chinese, to be very honest, are not going to actually operate in the ways in which they've operated in the Pacific, in the Indian Ocean. There's a very different matrix of operations. The Chinese have desisted from challenging Indian interests in the Indian Ocean. They've kept to the open seas. So we've got to find ways in which we can deter China from using the sea lanes in ways that they can corner some of the strategic space in this region. So that's what my sort of take on this is. Thanks.
Thank you so much, sir. You've, I think, very well captured, encapsulated the broad, context. And yeah, sure, absolutely. The issue of technology and technology transfer has been and probably will remain so, because we've had also several rounds of deeper discussions, of much time with more folks. But that's where it seems that things kind of get stuck, technology transfer. And the point that India believes that when we are buying, we should get the technology rather than just a transactional purchase and sale. Several other points you mentioned, but also particularly the way China and would be looking at the maritime affairs, and of course your expertise and Hema's expertise in naval affairs, that they're looking at underwater small robotic machines or whatever we call submarines, like hardly 2 meter long, and hundreds of them, like coming in droves and droves, so to say. So that's the challenge India has to, look out for, no doubt. Thank you so much. May I now invite uh, him? Now, this is the penultimate round. After this will be the wrap-up comment from each speaker, right? So in this round, the question actually which was there, I'll put it there. One of the viewers is asking, and I think this can be the question for this round. Dave Paul is asking, what is the one change you would like to see regarding US-India defense relations over the next few years? So thank you, Dave Paul. We will make this as our lead question for this round. So starting with Hemant, what is the one change you would like to see regarding US-India defense relations in the next few years?
I think we will be seeing soon something coming on the ground, which has not been happening in the past. You will be seeing soon, we will be going beyond G to Z. One thing more I would like to add, see, FDI in the defense through automatic route has gone up to 74% from 49%, which earlier was 26%. So there had been paradigm shift in the thought process, 26 to 49 to 75. I would like to tell you over here, there are so many shipyards in India. They are functional today also, barring few, isn't it? Now, when we're talking about the technology through FDI route, the industry, the technology part of the US, they can come and join. They're a joint venture. And then the lesser DAP, there is a provision for joint venture bidding through the strategic partnership, or also to the normal capital acquisition of the ship construction project, where some of the industries, Indian industries, may not qualify in financial parametric requirements, isn't it? Where the US company, they can play route because infrastructure is already here. What that these industries lack is basically the qualifying criteria, the financial criteria, and then they don't have technology. If these two things comes out from the US, you will see you'll find the paradigm shift. You'll find the results started trickling in. You will find that things are moving very fast. These are the crux basically, which is blocking. If these two things are handled, you will see so many things will move very fast. And we are very hopeful with the continuity of the Indian-US relationship, which is moving in the positive direction. Things is going to come back on the ground and things will start rolling. But how fast it will be rolling, I will go back again. You have to have a nut bolt approach, tackling from that level. You have to have the WBS approach tackling from the level 3 onwards. The things will then you have to have the need of the collaborating the experts from both the sides beyond the G2G. And we are quite hopeful the things will come in place.
Thank you so much. Absolutely. I mean, an interesting convergence of the discussion. Thank you so much, Hemant. Now, may I invite Crystal for her comment or views on the question, which was that the question was from Dave Paul, probably maybe somebody in your extended network of family and friends, last name call. The question is, what is one thing you would like to see regarding US-India defense affairs over the next few years?
So I'll go back to what I was speaking about in terms of U.S.-India defense trade. And I know that 2 points have come up in discussion again and again. So one is the future of innovation, and the second is the issue of technology transfer. I think India historically has, going even back to the Section 83 state from the Indian Patents Act 1970, which states protection and enforcement of patent rights contribute to the promotion of technological innovation and to the transfer and dissemination of technology. I think this has been a thorn in India's side for really advancing and progressing in the space of technology transfer. There's been just a lot of distrust, and it stems beyond even defense trade, even with energy, with any U.S. company, from what I've seen for years, right? It's always been a struggle to come into India. The procurement process is abysmal. And they need to have some reform in it. So I think there's a lot of goodwill. I think that with the industrial security agreement that was just signed this past October, that was a really great milestone and a stepping stone in the right direction. But I think India will have to really change a lot of its regulations, a lot of its laws in regards to patents and technology transfer, and allow these U.S. companies in, because it will only benefit them ultimately to do so. They're still very much stuck in the past with a lot of very outdated a lot of outdated laws regarding tech transfer. And to really innovate, you need to have some trust. You need to create some bilateral, multilateral trade. And this goes into several spaces, right? I mean, artificial intelligence, augmented reality, virtual reality, multi reality. I mean, it's in all spaces. And I think that the changing in Delhi will have to change to get to a point where we're letting the Lockheeds, the Boeings come in and start to do this. And I think just one other point I'll add, that is at least a good indicator. I mean, the Indian Ministry of Defense, they released updated guidelines for capital acquisitions by the defense sector, the Defense Procurement Procedure, DPP, this year, which is aimed at increasing indigenous manufacturing, such as on the Arjun tank. So this is helping indigenous production, right? And it's showing some reform in that space. If we could maybe, leverage some of that change within the Indian Ministry of Defense towards foreign acquisition of defense equipment, then I think we can see some real progress and change moving forward in this space of innovation and in trying to bring, U.S.-India defense trade closer together.
Thank you so much, Crystal. I think probably, it's both sides. If we get down, there has to be some change from India. There has to be some change coming from the US also, apparently. But yes, the nuclear deal was the one, milestone to build up trust, atoms for peace and trust, I would say, but still a long way to go. And that's the question out there. Thank you so much. May I now invite John for his comment. What is the one thing you would like to see in the next few years between US and India related to defense relations? So,
Thank you. If we look at the commercial sector for guidance, the U.S. and Indian governments didn't need to come together for the two countries to share 5G networks, cloud computing, online commerce, search engines, right? It happened from the bottom up. I think for U.S.-India defense relations, that if we focus less on the barriers from the top down, and instead we have more and more military to military engagement at the lower levels. And if you're training and engaging at the lower levels, they will figure out how to communicate and how to bring in non-traditional defense companies to start that innovation to work together and build that command and control system. And there are many, many Indian technology giants, many, many American technology giants. They work together around the world. If we create that need through training, we don't have to have these big government programs which take a very long time to work through all the bureaucracies. In the United States Army, for example, Microsoft has teamed with Army units to bring virtual reality and next generation artificial intelligence to the individual soldier within a 2-year period, something that would have taken the bureaucracy a decade to attempt. They put the soldiers together with the engineers. If we take the Indian military and the US military and we put them together and we take the technological know how that exists in the commercial sector from both countries and put them together, they will find cost effective solutions that don't require big treaties and worrying about this equipment and that equipment. So if there's one thing that I hope for, it's more from the grounds up building of this communications network than from the top down.
Great point, sir. And I sure wish our panel, the think tanks, and our viewers, and this video, when it's watched more and more, when it's on YouTube, some of these key points, I think people should take more note and more encouragement as Hemant also, Abhijit also, and in fact, Crystal and Kriti also, and yourself are highlighting that instead of pure G2G, I mean, if there can be more, at the SME levels, at the lower down levels, collaboration, cooperation to kind of increase the punch of the defense of India and with US. Thank you, sir, so much. May I now invite Kriti for the one thing that we would like to see over the next few years?
So instead of focusing on, what particular thing India or US needs to change, I think I'll avoid that trap and just talk about what perhaps both of them need to change. So since I work more closely on trade and economic issues, and really, these issues are something that permeate all aspects of our relationship. One thing that I would want to change, and I actually anticipate will change very quickly now with the new administration, is the zero-sum approach towards trade. Both the governments, the outgoing administration as well as the Modi government in India, they've had this zero-sum approach towards trade. Modi government in particular has been very, very pro-investment, but when it comes to trade, there are those legacy factors that do weigh us down. So I think a change in approach, towards that zero-sum approach would be welcome. As we know, there's so much work that needs to be done, despite these really encouraging numbers. So we track numbers on a consistent basis, FDI numbers between US and India, the goods trade, service trade. We track all these numbers, and the numbers are very encouraging. But yet, there's so much more that we need to do. We all know about the ever-elusive trade deal, right? And then there was also talk of a mini trade deal. So those are things that we need to do. During the Obama administration, I think we wrapped up around 7 years of negotiations on a BITS treaty, and then both US and India went ahead and got their own model BITS treaty, and then that was that. So that's something to look into. FTA, perhaps looking at a joint service trade agreement together, since services trade is such an integral part of our relationship. So I think getting rid of that zero-sum approach and working together on trade issues and actually trying to get some solid strides in this direction would be really helpful, and I anticipate that. I'm hopeful towards that. Finally, in terms of defense more particularly, I think that a welcome change would be both US and India coordinating some of their actions. So I'll give you an example. Recently there was this whole ban on Chinese apps. India went ahead and in 3 cycles banned many of these Chinese apps. There's also momentum from the U.S. State Department where they said that some of these apps will not be allowed for U.S. government and so on and so forth. Now that is a great opportunity for something that U.S. and India could have perhaps talked to each other and done something collaboratively, and then that would have more of a punch, and a signal than it perhaps had in doing these things solo. So I think coordinating actions would be good. It's always good to talk to friends. So that's something that I'm hoping will change.
Thank you so much, Kriti. Always good to talk to friends. I'm reminded of a friend of mine used to once tell me, in this world, there are only 2 kinds of people: friends and potential friends. Because even my enemy could tomorrow be my friend. So all we have in this world are friends and future friends of potential. Thank you so much. Yes, I think what's coming out from all of you is that getting more into the trenches, nuts and bolts, and starting to perform now or execute some things, whichever way possible. Thank you so much. May I now invite Abhijit Singh for his thoughts on what the one thing you would like to see, sir, in the next few years.
Uh, Yeah, thanks. Let me just start by saying that I completely agree with the points that Kriti made and Crystal also made about the fact that there is an apparent zero-sum mentality when it comes to defense trade, etc., and a certain transactionalism that we see both in the U.S. approach and in the Indian approach. And again, when Crystal says that India needs to somehow get its act together, I would completely agree with her because there are some experts, not just on the US side, but also on the Indian side, that have pointed out that it's one thing to tell the US to transfer technology, US companies to transfer technologies, but are we ready? Do we have the systems to absorb the technology? And we've really not worked on that. We don't quite have what it takes to be able to make that technology a part of our ecosystem. And we have some way, and the US did offer us some help in being able to develop that sort of ecosystem, but we've not quite been able to do that. So let's just point to one fact. Look, transactionalism is inherent in defense trade. Because ultimately it's about job, it's about the capital that is invested, and no defense company worth its salt would just go out there and transfer technology. So I guess what we need is that both sides need to get into a dialogue. We need to have greater empathy for each other's positions, some meeting ground, common ground from where we can negotiate with each other. This is not going to be an outcome of any benevolence or altruism on the part of the US. It is, the Biden administration is going to be, more open-hearted than the Trump administration was, and suddenly we're going to get all the technology is going to materialize. That's not going to happen. It is going to be pretty much the same. It's just that when the Trump administration, things were pretty much set in stone that this is what you could do, this is what you couldn't do. And there was a lot that you could do, but there was technology was definitely not on the table. Now with the Biden administration, I think we've got to open those channels of communication talk. And one of the areas that we haven't talked about that, but which we should, is actually DTTI, Defense Trade and Technology Initiative. Now, in the Obama administration, when this was launched, there was a great deal of promise that this was actually about co-production and co-development. So there was a sense that both sides would be involved in developing this technology. There would be a sense of involvement, ownership of the technology, but really we've seen no movement forward. So there was something known as the Pathfinder project that we worked on, the Raven mini drones, the roll-on, roll-off kits, for the C-130s. All of that actually came a cropper. Nothing could really move forward, and it was again the fault was not the US's or India's, or rather the fault was both US and India. India actually was not investing really in the procedures. Our technical side was not geared up for the challenge. On the US side, the focus really was on plugging the big ticket items using the DTTI route. So, for instance, the US wanted us to, take on the production of an entire aircraft, the F-18 or the F-16, using the DTTI route. That was the way of proposing to the Indians that let's try and work on this entire production line together. But that again didn't come through. I think what we need to do is focus on DTTI, look for ways in which we can develop co-produce technology together, even if in small ways. But that's definitely going to be a way forward. And secondly, and more importantly, let us acknowledge that we are in an era of fiscal constraints. It's a very constrained environment. We are not going to have the capital to buy big ticket items from the US. Let's focus on equipment. So, for instance, I pointed out during my opening remarks, underwater technology. Some of the, we for a long time wanted to develop these underwater sensors that we can have a chain of sensors across the Andaman Islands so we could be able to keep track of Chinese submarines. Let's just focus on developing that kind of stuff. If there's something that the US is not quite prepared to, some kind of technology that they do not want to share with India, India should respect that because the Americans have their red lines over what can be shared and what can't be shared. We're a partner, but they have those red lines even with their NATO partners. So let's be realistic about what can be achieved. Let's not be too ambitious, but let's keep all lines of communication open, talk to each other, And as I've always told my American friends, the great thing about America and India is that we speak our minds to each other. It's almost like you're sitting in a room and talking with friends. So I don't think each side is going to have any misgivings about what can be shared or what can't be shared. But that's what I have to say. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Thank you. Absolutely. I mean, these are the stark realities. And as you mentioned, it's a supreme national interest for each country. Nobody is going to be doing the other a favor. But the issue is that, yes, in our own enlightened interest and in US own enlightened interest, the two countries come together more and more. And, it's a professional relationship and we have to respect, yes, the red lines also. And there are these red lines which we should not feel unhappy if we are not able to transcend those red lines, but at the same time, yes, collaborate and achieve as much as possible through innovations, maybe if not in big ticket platforms or equipments, but ancillary supporting, so for overall capacity building of the purpose there. Thank you so much. May I now invite, now we are moving to the last round. This is your closing comments. You can pick up on any thread, and any folks who's watching by. Still, I see a lot of people are watching, but no comments coming in now. Please put in your comments and questions. We'll still try to take your questions, folks. So now this is the closing round. Your closing comments. You can pick any comment, any thought which has been sparked in you in this discussion itself, or share any of your thoughts. Maybe 1.5 minutes each. So, Hemant, sir, yours.
See, I think someone asked the question about the innovation in the capital acquisition. This is a part of the DAP 20, very much covered. But how it can be implemented, that is a question mark. And where you will come back again to the basic, rather than targeting the big tickets, the real scenario of the equipment. And equipment's not limited to the defense. You have to go beyond defense and try to integrate oil and gas. As per the Indian perspective, both have a like similarity where almost 80% is import. Many of the ships you are making in India, but still majority of the equipment coming from outside. The real scenario, the make in India and go when you start making this equipment in India, basically through the TOT. Now, through this TOT, not only they can target Indian market, but they can also target Middle East, Southeast Asia, and Far East Asia. So it will be beneficial for the US and India both. And India is a big market. India is a stable market. We are again a very mature democracy together. So it's a real time to come down the execution level, tackling the small things and targeting the big things. That's my take. That's my 2 cents.
Thank you, sir. I think it's a very interesting convergence coming around in this discussion that fair enough, what's happening with the big ticket items, let's work at it. But at the same time, let's build up the ancillary systems, the ancillary, technologies and tools, which can, of course, which can, of course, assist and, complement the main platforms and systems. That's one common, sense, I think, arriving out of this conversation. Thank you so much, Heyman. Now, may I invite you, Crystal, please, for your closing comments or any thoughts which have been sparked in you by your fellow panelists or the questions from the audiences. Yours, please.
Thank you. So yeah, I'll just recap again. I think historically India's trusted strategic ally was Russia, right? I mean, the 70s and 80s, India bought its defense hardware from Russia, which led to an era of modernization. And a lot of this came from the U.S. moratorium placed on them from the nuclear Pokhran explosion, obviously in 1974. G2G trade, where cost consideration was a priority, has obviously now shifted. And we see that China's greatest existential threat, China is India's greatest existential threat, not Pakistan, right? And that's a huge factor in all of this. And I think the U.S. has realized that, and India. So if we're looking at a post-U.S.-India nuclear deal and what the future holds, we should look at today, the U.S. is the largest beneficiary of India's G2D procurements. From just 2013 to 2018, Indian purchases from the U.S. jumped up 569%. Arms purchases in February 2020 took a total amount of 20 billion, as I reiterated. And for the longest time, India's preferred G2G deals because they're a lot easier, compared to obviously lengthy RFIs, RFPs, trials, negotiations. So I think the future looks positive if we just see the trajectory from the past 7 years. And I think that we're going to see, two strategic natural allies, both the oldest and largest democracies in the world, come closer together in a defense cooperation because of the fact that, again, I mean, the US is looking at China and so is India. And I think both nations are realizing, probably more so the US than India is now realizing that this is needed. And this is a long time coming. This probably should have happened decades ago, but due to obviously historic events, we didn't get there as soon as we should have. So I'll just close on that. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Crystal. Absolutely, it's a work in progress. But yes, the last 20 odd years have seen, accelerated relations, and the nuclear deal was was one milestone we all relate. So in that sense, it's been hardly 10 odd years when the two countries have really, started to kind of, talk deeper and deeper with each other. So yes, much hope out there. But yes, the concerns also, I mean, coming years, maybe the US new administration would focus more on, Europe, NATO, China. So, I mean, people are multitasking, so that's out there. Thank you so much. May I invite John Ferrari? Sir, your concluding thoughts?
Yes, first of all, thank you for hosting this event and for having me. It is extremely worthwhile, and the more we talk, the easier things come to move forward. I think as two nations, we need to focus on looking forward and not looking backward at kind of a lot of the historical of how we got where we are. We both live in different neighborhoods, and so that kind of will influence how we approach the problems we solve. But as this pandemic is showing, the world is a very small place, and everything is interconnected. And the economies, the global health, all the things that are the broader national security that defense security are part of, from energy, are all linked together. And so if the two defense organizations, right, the departments in both nations, continue to work together, and the key is, again, I'll reiterate, is engagement, innovation to communicate, right? That will drive a lot of the other big ticket decisions that need to be made. And so if we just take advantage of the technological prowess that exists already in the two countries, we can solve a lot of the problems rapidly, and then we can worry about some of the other hard to tackle issues later on down the road. Thank you again.
Thank you so much. I think that definitely is a very, very wise and point which is coming across as a refrain, that collaboration and strengthening of multiple other areas, which end of the day are still feeding into the capacity building and strength of the national security of both countries. We are there. Thank you so much, John. Meanwhile, we had a comment also from Silpesh. Polls have shown Americans are more sympathetic towards India, and this includes differences depending on political affiliation. But what this attitude extend to backing New Delhi in a conflict with Beijing? Thoughts? Shilpesh, thank you so much for your question. I'm sorry we don't have the time to take it in for the format right now. But yes, that's a big daddy question. I mean, out there in the room, that in India, face off with China, to what extent? I think we do understand US, we are not looking at any military participations, but whatever can be for strengthening of India. So we'll pass on this question, I'm sorry, and we'll continue with that. But in any case, thank you so much, Shilpesh, for coming by and asking the question. Now, may I request Kriti for your concluding thoughts, please?
Well, thank you again, Robinder, for convening this very helpful roundtable. I'm going to sign off on a hopeful note because I do think there is a lot of hope and scope between the US-India relationship. I think much of the groundwork in our relationship has been done now, right? We've had an impressive defense pipeline, as Priscilla said, going all the way from $0 to $20 billion now and above. We have US giving India the STA1 status, which gives India access to a lot of defense equipment that is usually reserved only for NATO allies. We have, the growing centrality of Indo-Pacific. We have all our foundational agreements signed. So I think now the question really comes to, to keeping this momentum on, and I'm hopeful that it will. In the beginning, I said that U.S.-India defense relationship going forward will be marked by continuity, and I stick to that. And I'll just touch upon why I think that continuity will be there. I do feel that more recently there is this growing understanding both in US and India, especially in the US, that India is a strategic partner, and the importance that India has in balancing off China and maintaining the rules-based order within the region. And secondly, I think the momentum has also led to few quick wins, which will motivate more wins in the future. So having said that, I think I'm hopeful, and I'm sure all of us are hopeful, and I think things have just begun. There's a lot that we'll see in the future years.
Thank you so much, Kriti. Thank you so much. Wonderful summation and hopeful. Yes, I think that's something which we all would absolutely sign on to and sign off on that. It's very hopeful. Much has been done and much is being done. And it's a very mature and a very smart, and in fact, getting smarter and smarter because, both country people are getting, in this age, there's more knowledge, more awareness, more, more sense of what's out there. So it's a very smart and balanced relationship which is evolving. Thank you so much. May I now invite Abhijit Singh, please, for your concluding thoughts, sir, as we wrap up this session on the future of US-India defense relations. The floor is yours.
Thank you, Robinder. This has been a very useful discussion, and I too am going to end on a very optimistic note. Let me just say this: that I see a very bright future for the India-US relationship. I think this is a very honest and open relationship, and there are many values that we share, which is very apparent. I would also agree that the strategic community sees ourselves as strategic and natural partners. But let me just say this before I end that there is during the Obama administration, one often read that a rising, prosperous India is in the US's interest. I think that this formulation hasn't changed. This is still valid today as much as it was, during those years. That the more India shows promise, the more powerful we are, and the more we can position ourselves as a meaningful entity in the Indian Ocean region. U.S. interests will be served in the future. But let me just say this: that as we now move into this era where there might be a greater focus from the U.S. on economic challenges, especially a lot of challenges in the U.S., both countries have to be more patient with each other, and we've got to give each other the space that we require to get our house in order, to look at our domestic challenges, and all the same also look at ways in which we can cooperate in areas of interest, converging areas of interest. In the Indian Ocean region, or rather in the Indo-Pacific region, I think what we will do with the US in the coming years will depend how much on the extent of the strategic convergence or overlap between our perspectives of worldviews. So, for instance, if the US appreciates India's China challenge in the Indian Ocean, does not treat this theater as a low priority theater or as one of my American colleagues the other day said that this area is actually not an area of this is an economy of effort area for the US. So if the US does not treat this as an economy of effort area, then there is certainly a lot that we could do with the US in defense and in strategic affairs. But if the US is going to remain distracted with its challenges in the Pacific and going to prioritize those challenges rather than the Indian Ocean challenges, then I think there is going to be less. I'm not saying that we will not do very much in the US, but there is going to be less interest in a strategic convergence with the US. But all in all, I think it's a very positive sort of a scenario going forward. We are going to look for areas in which we can work, and I think the future is going to be bright for both countries.
Thank you so much, sir. Fantastic summation. I was thinking of an analogy, since we have folks from the naval background, it's like, the ship should not go adrift. We got to the ship. I mean, to the point that you said that if America gets more preoccupied with some other interests, then the relationship will not go adrift. But the point is that that whole momentum would be slightly slowed down, and India would look. I mean, everyone is looking. The US would look, and India would look. So I hope that the captains of our ships in both the countries would absolutely continue to, sink and take this big super tanker on a even direction. Thank you so much to each one of analysts. It's been an utmost pleasure of mine to host you, to provoke you for your questions, and your answers and thoughts were brilliant, brilliant, brilliant. We've had many questions coming in. The video of this will be put up on YouTube and shared with you each, as well as with other folks. It will be on our YouTube link. And once again, it was a pleasure, and I thank you for joining in for this Saturday noon our defense dialogue. Thank you, folks. This was our regular Saturday noon hour dialogue discussion where we pick up different topics every week. Uh, Hosted by the US India Political Action Committee and the Imaginary Institute. Once again, our thanks to our esteemed panelists. Our thanks also to the viewers who popped in, put up the questions or comments. Our thanks also to the outstanding team which helps us to produce this show. Steve, particularly, Prasoon, particularly, and other members of the US Impact team and Imagine India team. It's been a pleasure to host all of you. Thank you so much. This broadcast now ends.
Thank you.